Westmoreland Community Connections is a presentation of Citizens Fiber.
Welcome to Westmoreland Community Connections, a look at issues and happenings on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. Here now is your host, Jennifer Miele, Chief Communications Officer and Managing Director of Evangelization of the Diocese of Greensburg.
Welcome to Westmoreland Community Connections on WHJB. I'm your host, Jennifer Miele. Happy to be here today with the founders of Pressing On and their partner organization, Rise Westmoreland. I'd like to introduce you now to Richie and Regan Reeder and Suzanne Desvonick. Thank you both and Suzanne for jumping on today. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Wonderful. So I'm going to start with Richie and Regan. You're obviously a husband and wife team, and you are the founders of Pressing On. So I want to hear the whole story. I want to hear about your family and how and why you founded this wonderful organization.
Well, we like to say that Pressing On wasn't just some idea that we cooked up. It was based upon life experience and kind of the passion of our heart. But I think Regan tells the story a little bit better than I do sometimes.
It really goes back to our youngest daughter, Micah Joy, and her birth. She was born in January of 2015. I had a totally normal pregnancy. She was delivered by C-section and everything seemed completely normal until the third day of her life, when she started to decline really rapidly. She was refusing to eat. She was lethargic. She started convulsing, almost seizure-like activity. And so I had her at Forbes Hospital in Monroeville, and really quickly the team started moving to get her transferred down to West Penn to NICU. So I got to experience what it felt like to leave the hospital empty-handed without my baby. And I'll never forget the feeling of that. But even worse, we didn't even end up knowing where she was going or what was going on with her. Of course, at first they thought it was like a cold that had turned into a fever. And when the transport team came to transfer her down to West Penn, one of the nurses looked at me and said, "You have a very, very sick baby. You should be very concerned," because she had run enough blood gas tests to know that something more severe was going on. So we actually had a couple hours that we didn't even know where our baby was, because they transferred her to West Penn down to Children's Hospital, where they realized that she had very dangerous ammonia levels, which I remember thinking we had never heard of. And now it's just something we are very understanding of. But she was put on dialysis within a few hours of getting to Children's Hospital. And it was even that first night that they mentioned the words liver transplant to us, knowing that while it wouldn't be a cure, ultimately her diagnosis of methylmalonic acidemia would need to be treated by a liver transplant. So it kind of all started like a roller coaster and has continued to be so. Micah did receive her liver transplant in January of 2017, so when she was almost 2 years old. And even through that whole experience, understanding what it felt like to be waiting for an organ, every time the phone rang, your stomach just dropped out from underneath you. And we actually had 3 false alarm phone calls for her liver. So there were 3 times that they said, "We have a liver, this is it," and it wasn't. So it was actually our 4th call that she did receive her liver transplant. And in true Micah fashion, she checked off complication possibilities one by one by one. So she was on a ventilator for almost a month post-transplant, and we spent over 2 months inpatient before, thank God, she got to come home. So the whole story of Pressing On started with that, and continues to be that we had such a wonderful support system in place with family and friends from work and church. And yet we felt like we were drowning, and we felt like we were so isolated and overwhelmed. And all I could think of that whole time was, if I'm feeling this way with this much support, how must some of these other people be feeling who are really navigating things like this really alone? And so began the burden of God placing that on our hearts to eventually found Pressing On, to find ways to resource, coach, equip, uplift people who are in crisis.
Richie, that must have been an extremely traumatic experience for you. And so with a child who needs so much care, was it your wife or you who said to the other one, "I think we should found a nonprofit"?
In our free time.
We like to say that we collaborated on this process, but it was definitely an idea that I had because I felt like, we had an opportunity to impact a lot of families that, providentially, we just met so many families that were going through tough times in the hospital. And almost kind of like it didn't make sense to our family and our friends per se, but it was almost like we escaped from a burning building and we were ready to run back in. I remember sharing it with some close friends of like, what would you think if we started an organization to care for these families? And of course, from our experience, it made sense. But I think some people caring for our well-being and our emotional health and our mental health are like, you guys sure that you really want to take on this responsibility? And obviously, as a dad, like you'd take a bullet for your kid. Like as a parent, like you would just trade places with your child in an instant. But you can't take that disease and that surgery upon yourself. And so you want to be there the best way that you can. But there's lots of families that need to grow in their self-care and how they address physical needs. There's other families that need to grow emotionally and maybe be recommended to a therapist. Regan and I are very, very pro advocates of therapy, especially walking through trauma and crisis. We've both gone through that personally, and we recommend that to so many other families. But, it was definitely my idea that we collaborated on quite a bit because I told Regan, I said, I don't want to do this alone. I can't start this alone. And frankly, there's so many moms that are in the hospital that they would rather talk to you than rather talk to me anyway. So I, work on the administration and the finances and the marketing and communication. And I do some of the care for some of our families. But Regan, especially with her background in special education, just has such a heart for these families, that has such a warm and welcoming presence to be able to care for them and connect with them in a great way. So we definitely say that we're a good team. We run all of the decisions past one another and past our board and past our advocates and those that we consult with, like Suzanne. But we definitely feel like our lives and our background, our experience and our education led us to a place where we could be collaborative in leading this organization forward. And that's kind of how it was birthed, as a collaborative effort amongst both of us.
Both of you so well spoken, and what an amazing story. And then we bring in the founder of Rise Westmoreland, and her name is Suzanne Disvonick. And I believe that Suzanne and Regan met through work and, probably shared a special bond because Suzanne developed her nonprofit in an effort to help people in crisis. So Suzanne, why don't you tell us about your nonprofit, and then we'll talk about your partnership.
So several years ago, I had an idea that I wanted to fulfill the needs of children that may have been traumatized or in crisis. So I spent a lot of time certifying myself in different types of training, like mental health first aid, trauma-informed care, those types of things, doing a lot of research, safety and wellness research, then trying to provide that information to different school districts or different families that may be in need. So I was very fortunate to be able to do that when I was on a sabbatical. And now I'm back to school full time, several years in, and I'm still working with some families, but I tossed and turned for a long time thinking I just want to partner what I have with something else that I think that, is going to be able to, work with what I have, but then I can also maybe just give a few ideas or be a support to theirs. So hence pressing on. Regan and I, yes, did work in the same district. She's working there again, but she and I never worked in the same building, but being special education teachers, having knowledge of one another. What they are doing is so incredible. So the conversations that we had were, how can we take Rise's mission and use those resources to help what Pressing On is doing? So what we're doing is looking into different kinds of coaching options, different types of counseling for families and actually for siblings that have been affected by their traumatized life, whether it be because their sibling was sick or hospitalized. So Pressing On actually does a lot more than just with the hospitalized family. So what's nice is when they come home, can we give them some resources and some support? Can we provide them, we get them hooked up with a provider that's going to support their needs? So that's kind of where I came in, just talking to them a little bit about, trauma and how the brain is affected, how children are affected by trauma, and how we can better support those needs.
Seems like a perfect fit to me. And I'll ask Richie and Regan, do you have other siblings? And, how have they managed through all of this?
Yeah, we do have a 9-year-old daughter, Olivia, who is not affected. This disease that Micah has is genetic. So we are very fortunate and blessed that our older daughter is not affected by it. But yeah, she's been through a lot as well. And one of the great things that we appreciate about Children's Hospital is the way that they did have us follow up with a child transplant family psychologist. And so we would meet with her as a family unit. She would spend time talking to us about our marriage, to Olivia about how the trauma affected her. And so I really appreciate the fact that they are well of that. One thing that we often say is that home does not equal healed. And we try to really meet people's tangible needs to ultimately meet their intangible needs. And that means first you need to make sure that families in crisis have eaten and had a chance to sleep sometime and take a shower. And we try to meet some of those physical needs first. But ultimately, when you are thinking about the family unit as a whole, including siblings like Olivia, home is sometimes just as hard in a different way as the hospital, because you start unpacking some of those things and finding the fallout of what has happened. So,
and I'll add to that too. Some agencies or organizations may just focus on the physical or the emotional or the spiritual or the mental or the social. And we're really aiming for holistic care of these families. I always think that when somebody asks me not only about how Micah is doing, our transplant child, but how's older sister Olivia coping with all of this? I always think it's a wise and insightful question, because let's face it, the grandparents of a medically fragile child are affected in, a different way than the siblings are, than the patient themselves, than the mom or the dad are. And in our culture, there's many different valid family dynamics, and families look different in every, city and culture. And we want to come alongside, all different types of families and provide holistic care.
Suzanne, you've always been an advocate of mental health awareness. May being Mental Health Month, this is a significant topic that I wanted to cover on Westmoreland Community Connections. And, you focus on the mental health aspect, and, the awareness is so important. So what kind of stories did you hear about Pressing On that made you think to yourself, this is a perfect fit to partner with?
Well, finding out I knew what they were doing, but then when I spent some more time talking with Regan and Richie about what they were doing and how they were following up with these families for months, even years, and supporting them, I thought, wow, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Some trauma does not go away overnight. Like, Regan said, home doesn't always equal healed, and actually can be a trigger. If somebody was ill at home, or we've had that discussion of the phone ringing, and it can trigger these different events, and also for children. So not only, did I find out they were doing that, but, we had conversations surrounding finding all of these people and getting them connected to each other. Because just knowing that someone else feels the same way you do can really take a weight off of a traumatized person's shoulders. So, I think we've met. We're going to continue to work on different items. I just placed a large order of different resources that I'm going to peruse and see, okay, we put this on the website. Is this something that you're interested in? If you're you're sitting in the hospital, it's the middle of the night, what can you read? What can you do? We're going to try to really get those resources for those families at no charge.
You're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on WHJB. I'm talking to the founders of Pressing On, and their partner, the founder of Rise Westmoreland. We'll be right back.
This is Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. If you have a suggestion for a topic, or if your nonprofit organization would like to be featured on this program, call us during regular business hours at 724-216-1200.
Westmoreland Community Connections is a presentation of Citizens Fiber.
Welcome back to Westmoreland Community Connections on WHJB. I'm your host, Jennifer Miele. Happy to be here today with an amazing organization called Pressing On and its founders, Richie and Regan Reeder. They had a very traumatic experience with their own child at 3 days old, being diagnosed with a very, very serious illness, having to be life-flighted to a Pittsburgh hospital, put on an organ transplant list, and eventually receiving that organ transplant. And this traumatic experience, just like Richie said in the beginning part of our show, made them run away from a burning building and then run right back in by founding a nonprofit organization to help other families who are in crisis. So, Regan, I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about some of the projects that you have worked on and some of those tangible aspects that you make available to helping people in health crises.
Absolutely. So the best place to find out about what we do is our website, www.pressingon.org. And our biggest program is our hospital care package program. We provide hospital care packages free of charge. They ship all over the continental United States and include things that we have found to be incredibly helpful and often missing as caregivers in the hospital. They include things like a hanging toiletry bag because there's no counter space in a hospital bathroom. It includes toiletries and healthy prepackaged snacks. It includes a notepad and pen so you can take notes and remember questions to ask the medical team because they always slip your mind. And when they walk out the door, they all come back. So it includes things like a water bottle because you need to stay hydrated and take care of yourself. And when we are providing things here in Pittsburgh, we try to provide meal vouchers specifically at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, where we know it's an easy way to make sure that the parents are also being fed. So our hospital care package program is our largest program. We have shipped to dozens of states, and we love seeing people open those care packages and know that it brightens their day in a small way and meets a physical need. We also have a gas card program. This is our newest program where people in the greater Pittsburgh area can apply for a gas card to a Get-Go gas station just to offset the cost of what it does cost to travel back and forth to hospital day after day after day. So those are our two biggest programs at the moment. And Suzanne is helping us to create a mental health component of a program that we hope to launch on our website later this year.
If you're just joining us, you're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on WHJB. I'm speaking with the founders of Pressing On, who recently partnered with the founder of Rise Westmoreland, Suzanne Desvonick. So Suzanne, tell us a little bit about your work and maybe one or two things that you would like to make available to people.
I really think it's important to have two things available. One being emergency support. So what can happen when you're in the middle of a traumatic event or maybe even a panic attack or feeling like I'm just going to go crazy? So can we provide something via the website for them to listen to, read, or we talked about working towards supporting the Calm app is a wonderful app, different applications that we would be able to feed to those people right away for immediate support. And then secondly, ongoing care. So connecting, working with providers that are interested in working with families that have been through trauma or are currently in crisis. So connecting them with ongoing care. So what we're doing is talking to different hospitals and different providers and counselors. We're not counselors. So, we really can't ourselves provide that. However, we can try to make that connection for them and guide them to make those appointments.
Richie, when you were going through the beginning part of the trauma with your daughter, you were talking about how you had such a great support system, but still felt lost. Explain that feeling and explain what you wanted to do about it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's a little bit confusing because you feel like you've got a great support system around you. family, friends, work, insurance, community of faith, what have you. But when you go through something really, really tough in life, I think that we're tempted to think that no one else has gone through what we're going through. So the last thing that you need is, somebody to come along and simply say, oh, things are going to be fine, or I understand, or you know what, it'll get better tomorrow. Well, none of those things are guaranteed. And I think that there's a lot of platitudes that people say in times of crises that they mean well, and they don't necessarily know what to say. And so they say things that are kind of isolating. That's like, well, how could you truly understand? I mean, you're not in my shoes. My daughter might still have her diagnosis and might still have complications tomorrow. It might not get better tomorrow. And so how do you cope in a wise way? And some of those things are really hurtful. And so, when you go through something like that, you really, really, really need someone that's just a sounding board that you can be honest with, that you can be vulnerable with, that you can share how things have gone over the last couple of hours, couple of days. It's literally one day at a time in the midst of crisis. And you need tangible resources along your path, not just pithy sayings of, things will be fine. And I think along the way too, like people send a lot of things that they mean well to care for families in hospitals, like teddy bears and flowers and, different things that are just like, well, those balloons that you sent, they get popped and we don't take them home, and, there's lots of things that people try to do because they mean well. But at the same time, too, we want to kind of challenge the status quo in our organization to talk about what's most helpful for hospitalized families, highlighting the issue of mental health, talking about real, tangible resources like caregiver meal vouchers to make sure that families eat, our care packages, that address physical, tangible needs, downloadable resources that we have online on our website, like what to pack for the hospital, even music playlists that can uplift and inspire of various genres that people can listen to in the middle of the night. We're really passionate about putting things online and long to put more digital content as the organization grows. And that's just kind of how we feel, the organization got started from our experience. But as we move into the future, we really, really want to focus on those tangible needs that'll meet families where they're at.
And I have to ask, how is your daughter now? Give us the status update.
Oh, thanks for asking. She's doing absolutely as well as can be expected. She's more than 4 years post-transplant, which is really hard to believe. It's gone at a turtle's pace and lightning speed at the same time. But she's doing very well. She is hopefully COVID depending, going to kindergarten in the fall, which will be way harder on me than her, but she's doing well.
That's wonderful to hear. And how are you two doing now?
I always say that I lead from a place of vulnerability. I'm never going to be the one to pretend that things have not affected me or that I'm going to tell you something to do that I haven't done or experienced myself. And so we still experience the ongoing trauma of what we've been through. We're still processing that and we will continue to. But overall, I'm thankful that we're still together. I'm thankful that I think we have some semblance of sanity most of the time, given everything that we've been through. What do you think?
I think the words that come to mind for me that we've learned through experience to be real, raw, and vulnerable. I think that there's way too many facades in this life, whether that be personally, relationally, organizationally. And we really want to cultivate that real, raw, vulnerable attitude in the families that we serve. Because let's face it, the only way that we're going to move forward and grow out of our experiences in life, the positives or the negatives, is if we're honest with one another. And it's okay to not be okay. And I think many times, especially families that have been through trauma and crisis in the hospital, really feel sometimes like they got to give a right answer or they got to say the right line. And by focusing on real, raw, vulnerable, I think that we can really get to some heart issues. And that's helped us personally. And that's an attitude that we want to transfer to the families that we serve.
So how can individuals get involved? Is it donations? Is it volunteerism? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's a few different ways that, obviously you can go to pressingon.org to review our programs, to review our initiatives. They're changing all the time. We do different things seasonally. We focus on hospitalization support, special needs advocacy, grief and loss care, and we're growing in the mental health space as well, as Suzanne talked about. But first start at the website, pressingon.org. We have had some very limited amount of volunteers throughout COVID. That's shifted our volunteer base a little bit, but we've had some limited volunteers for hospital care package packing parties, as well as connecting some families with some pressing on coaching opportunities. It's important to us that our volunteers have gone through something tough in life that they can really resonate with the family and serve them well. While the organization just started with Regan and I, we're looking to continually raise up pressing on liaisons and coaches that can walk side by side with the families that we serve in crisis and refer our different programs and stuff like that. Social media is big for us, that we long to grow in that. Pressing on PGH on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. You can find us on all of those channels that we're looking to uplift and inspire and highlight some of our program resources. So following along on social media would be important as well. And to this point, in our organizational life, we've taken very little funding from foundations thus far, that a lot of them want to see 24 months of programming before they start to fund some of our initiatives. Several foundations have given us great feedback from a donation perspective of long-term that like to support us. But we're in that kind of middle ground right now where everything that we do as an organization is supported by families just like you. And so we're grateful to report that nearly 300 families have jumped on board with either supporting the organization's mission on a monthly basis and becoming a Pressing On partner by donating as little as $10 a month or a couple $100 a month to sustain the mission and the programs that we have. So volunteering on a limited basis throughout COVID here has been something that people can get involved with, but referring families to our programs and then also donating and becoming a Pressing On partner is key as well.
Suzanne, you just did a nice fundraiser, brought in a couple $1,000s for the organization as well.
Well, the nice thing is that I think I professionally fundraise. Now I spend a lot of time asking people, but I'll tell you, the nice idea about doing these small fundraisers is that it just helps to boost these new ideas. So what I did want to mention is if you do go to the Pressing On website, they're an added, I'm not 100% sure. I'm sure they can clarify. If you want some guidance, you can choose whether or not you would just want to speak to someone, or if you would want some support spiritually as well. So I think that that's a really nice piece to Pressing On is, it doesn't have to be necessarily a religious counseling. However, if that's something that supports you and your family, that's available too. So we're looking at resources surrounding that as well. Are we able to talk to families a little bit about how their, connection with their religion can help support them through trauma?
Yeah, absolutely. On our website, when you go to find support, you can check what areas of support you're looking for, whether that's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. And so while our nonprofit is a non-religious nonprofit, we are people of faith. And when given the opportunity to speak into that realm, we love to do so.
Thank you so much. I have 3 powerhouse people on the line today, speaking on Westmoreland Community Connections. Richie and Regan Reeder, founders of Pressing On, and their partner, Suzanne Desvonick from Rise Westmoreland, talking about help for families in crisis. Wonderful job. Thank you all so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm your host, Jennifer Miele. You're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on WHJB.
This has been Westmoreland Community Connections, a look at issues and happenings in and around Westmoreland County. Join us again next week on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB.
Westmoreland Community Connections is a presentation of Citizens Fiber.